Welcome to Connected Learning TV, a broadcast of Educator Innovator, powered by the National Writing Project. This episode is being recorded on April 29th, 2019, and is part of the 2018-19 Marginal Syllabus project. Marginal Syllabus is a project that convenes and sustains equity conversations in the margins of texts online using the digital annotation tool Hypothesis. I'm Joe Dillon from the Denver Writing Project, and I'm a co-founder of Marginal Syllabus, along with my colleague Remi, Kalir. I'll be your host for this conversation. We've got a great panel here to discuss this month's reading, which is titled "We Are Not Dirt: Freirean Counternarratives and Rhetorical Literacies for Student Voice in Schooling." We're excited to welcome to tonight the authors, Everardo Pedraza and Joseph Rodriguez. Hope I did those names justice. As well as, those are our authors, and then I also have Nobuko Fujita and Sam Reed joining us as reader respondents. So I'd like to ask everyone to take a moment to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Everardo Pedraza, and I teach 10th grade English at Sunnyside High School in Fresno, California, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Joseph Rodriguez. I'm a former public school teacher. I'm a graduate of the Central Texas Writing Project for Teachers and currently co-editor of English Journal, and I teach at Fresno State University in the Kremen School of Education and Human Development.
Hi, my name is Nobuko Fujita. I am a learning specialist at the University of Windsor, which is just across the river from Detroit, Michigan, and the margins of Detroit. And I'm really interested in finding out how this story of this equity and participatory action research in a writing setting, and including students as co-creators of text.
Hey everyone, this is Sam Reed here in Philadelphia at the U School. I teach students to read, write, and make sense of the world. I'm a founding teacher at the U School here in Philadelphia, and I'm excited to hop in and chop it up in this conversation. It's really particularly exciting to see a teacher and a researcher collaborating and co-writing a piece that reflects the real work, the dirty work. Anyway, that goes on in the classroom. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, everyone. Briefly, my name is Kalir. I'm a co-founder and co-facilitator of Marginal Syllabus, along with a number of colleagues. It's lovely to meet new colleagues and see old colleagues in our conversation today. Day job, I'm an assistant professor of learning design and technology at the University of Colorado in Denver.
Terrific. So we're so glad to be hosting this conversation here, and I really like to start this conversation the way we always do, which is allowing our authors to have really the first say about the article and provide us any background they think is important to share about the writing of the piece, or maybe the actual teaching or the research work, whatever you think is most important to foreground before we dive into a discussion.
Great. Well, again, this is Everardo, and I would, just to kind of foreground the article, it started with a conversation towards the beginning of the school year with the whole class in terms of identifying problems that they see in their city or in their school. And one of the ones that came up was the name of the tardy policy called tardy sweep. So we discussed it a little more, and along with other social, problems on campus, the school lunches, etc. And this is one that they decided they wanted to do something about. And so it was part of my instruction was to introduce them to Paulo Freire's 5 steps of critical praxis, which I learned from one of Professor Ernest Morel and and Professor Duncan Andrade, their work, and it just kind of took off. But it was a project that was kind of took a while to do. While we continued with the curriculum, this was a project that, because it took on that real life, community service / activism activism, it took on a life of its own, in the sense that after the book was produced, because they wrote a book of letters, as the article states, then we had a book release party. People came to observe and participate and celebrate, and it wasn't like a quick decision on behalf of the principal. He said he liked their proposal, but that he wasn't the one to make the decision. He said that this name came from a committee on campus called Safe and Civil Schools, based on a book by that title. And so he invited us to attend that committee meeting and have the students, present the book to them in advance, as well as discuss it in the meeting. And I think we went to like 3 meetings before they finally decided towards the end of the year that they were going to continue discussing it. And the conversation continued. So the students started in their sophomore year. They got the conversation started towards the end of the year when the book was published, the self-published book. And then the meetings, the 3 meetings lasted throughout their junior year, and the decision was made administratively to make the change. And when they came onto campus their senior year, they were blown away by the fact that their work, their letters, their intellectual work on paper, and their public activism in terms of attending meetings and participating in the bureaucratic sort of professional process, they were blown away that their work was taken seriously, and the name of the policy was changed. I wanted to give that background to the article, because it's not mentioned in the article, and so I wanted to add that at this time. And so that was just a great experience on behalf of everyone involved in the project. So that's all I'll say for now. And as more questions or ideas arise, we could share more. But it was a very, very satisfying project. It was a lessons in patience was important, and also the other thing I want to mention is that the students engaged in an exercise of power, in the sense that they didn't overperform or underperform. And what I mean by that is, underperforming would have been to not believe that this project would make any significant change on the campus, and maybe just not put enough pedal to the metal and finishing it, or attending the meetings. That would be underperforming, which they didn't do. They attended, and they didn't overperform their relationship to their own agency and power by getting sort of what's the word? Too confrontational about changing the name, or verbally disrespectful. They stayed in a very sort of a middle ground, balancing the potential that they could overdo it or underdo it, but they didn't. They stayed right there, and so even wherever they are, good job, guys. To the class. Thank you.
I'm Jose Rodriguez from Fresno State University. I was in complete awe when Everardo Pedraza shared this book that was created by the students with the community, driven by a commitment to be heard, even, in moments when young people are talked down to or talked to or tested. There are things that are done to them. They're tested, they're talked down to, they're told what to do. But to hear that a teacher in California, among many, but in this particular case, this situation that was dehumanizing students in sweeping them away, I was really drawn to the work they created, led by their teacher, who took the time to listen and assess, in the traditional sense of the word assessment, in the original Latin verb, assidere, which is to sit beside. That was very significant for me to hear that Mr. Pedraza had done this, and that sitting beside wasn't solitary, they're the student's teacher, but it involved the community, the university community, the civic community, and even poets, some closeted, some public, who write across Fresno County, the San Joaquin Valley, and they joined the conversation with letters of support, with a poem that spoke to them. And I remember the title, We're Not Dirt. I immediately thought of the literary works that talk about this feeling of dirt, of ash, of less than, not equal to. But in this case, I thought of a poem by Emily Dickinson initially of sweeping up the heart, of putting love away, which sounds so tidy and New England-ish. But in this case, the students had to find out what resources, but first, the people with whom I can share this story and be heard. That meant a lot. And I think connected to this is Mr. Pedraza reached out to me in 1999. I had written an article while I was a graduate student at the University of Texas at Austin, but he had read an article I had written about the meaning of work, how my father, a laborer, made a distinction of the work that I do even today as a researcher. My father was describing the work he does as a manual laborer working at an oil refinery. But as a reader reached out to me who was teaching in Texas then, Mr. Pedraza, and that meant a lot to hear from a reader. And when I moved to Fresno, he was a person I wanted to reach out to in person, joining his city, his homeland, really in the West Coast. And he told me maybe a month into my arrival about the work that he had done with students. And immediately the writerly life, the scholarly life, the teacherly life merged, because these three roles or many more involve rolling up our sleeves. And I really was drawn to how this unfolded, the voices of students collected in a published book with a public audience, and all the work that they did behind the scenes. And it took so much time to name something with their own name, with their own words, in their own world, as Freire would want them to in this century.
So that's really useful background. It's great to hear about both the teaching and the teaching and the work with the students and the patients that was involved there. And it's also great to hear about how your the collaboration between the authors sort of formed. I wonder if there's anything else you feel like we should know before we start discussing the text. Either of you authors?
Yeah, I thank you. I wanted to just mention the moment where the project was well underway with the students, and we were discussing possible titles. And I remember a student by the name of Francisco who said, "We are not dirt." And I said, "Hey, let's write that down." So we wrote that down on the board, and other students chimed in, and that was the one that the kids wanted. And it was just a very touching moment, very clear, I remember it very clearly to this day. And I just wanted to share that piece, just because, like Joseph was saying, that, working with the students and, in this Freirean modality was just very, very humanizing and beautiful. And I look forward to the rest of our conversation. Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, it really gives good, strong context for the article. Oh, Joseph, I'm sorry. Did you have anything else?
Yes, I'd like to add that I think relationships have been very significant from, the informal interviews that I conducted with Everardo to the work that he has done over time in the community, in the Sunnyside High School greater community, of which he is an alumnus, and also that area of Fresno he knows so well, the families, the people, the change in administrators and teachers, but he has remained steadfast and connected. And I think it really helps that he does so much before, during, and after school. He promotes many literacies, multimodal literacies, and he also promotes nonviolence in his life, but also the lives of students through a mindfulness club that is student-led, student-driven, and it really helps the students, I believe, to dive inward into their interior life and build communities. And I think a significant part to that is that the students are able to work through difficulty as they process ideas. That it's a blend of, to use Everardo's word, of humanizing, but also a blend of metacognition in action, making thinking audible for the self. And the third piece is, I think, just being mindful of our ideas, our emotions, and our actions. I think they're very well triangulated, much like the teacher as writer, the student as writer, and these two as researchers.
Well, thank you both for that context you've given us for this conversation about the article. I'm thrilled that we have readers here who I know are excited to discuss the piece. And just before we get to that, I'd like to ask Remi to kind of explain just briefly about the Marginal Syllabus project and kind of what we're doing here in this conversation. So thanks, Remi.
Yeah, and again, I am just so thrilled to see everyone here. And again, my sincere thanks to our partner authors, Everardo and to Joseph. And this is why we have a Marginal Syllabus project. We bring educators from all walks of life, from all across this country, and in some cases all around the world, together to have conversations about educational equity topics. We've been around for 3 years now. This is the 7th conversation, the 7th article that the Marginal Syllabus will be reading and discussing in the 2018-19 academic year. This current syllabus is co-organized by the National Writing Project, also using all texts from the National Council of Teachers of English. So again, we're just so thrilled to have our partner authors with us, eager to engage in the conversation. This conversation will also move online. It will move online during the month of May into a digital annotation space. And so when we talk about the Marginal Syllabus, we're very intentionally playing with a number of connotations for the word marginal. And I always want to make this very explicit when I introduce the project, particularly for people who may be listening or watching this webinar for the very first time. We're, of course, engaging with counter-narratives. That's a word and a term that's used in this article by Everardo and Joseph. And so to have groups of educators read and discuss counter-narratives as marginal to the status quo of schooling is for us an important commitment. we're also having conversations in the margins of online texts. Once this article is posted as an open access text online, readers like perhaps Nabucco and Reed and Joe and maybe also Joseph and Everardo and myself will join the margins of the digital text and have a conversation in that space. And then lastly, we're also using a free open source technology to have that conversation. It's a technology for annotation called Hypothesis that is marginal to some of the dominant trends in more commercial educational technology. And so those are some of the connotations for why we call our project Marginal Syllabus. The last thing I'll mention briefly before I stop talking and we have a full conversation is we are in the process of announcing a 4th iteration of this project, which will launch in the summer of 2019 for teacher educators who are interested in connected learning. And we will be working with another publisher of academic texts and reading a series of articles about the connected learning framework and connected learning practices and how that can be brought into teacher education contexts. And so you can look for information about that. And of course, you can look for information about this conversation and all Marginal Syllabus conversations on our website, on the Educator Innovator website, which again is put together by the National Writing Project. And of course, you can follow all of our work on Twitter, following the hashtag Marginal Syllabus. I'll leave it there. I've already have 2 pages of notes, so I am looking forward to deepening this conversation. I'm going to stop talking and we'll turn it over to everyone else.
Thanks for that, Remi. And and now I'd like to invite Reed and Nabucco to please just, you can take this conversation where you'd like. It's great to have access to the authors, and also we're interested in sort of what ended up in your margins as you read this piece. So just invite the 2 of you to start to share what your thoughts were as you read.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop in first and just say, Everardo, like the piece resonated with me from the start because you mentioned like being a newspaper carrier, a newspaper boy. Like I was that dude as well. So I just wanted to recognize that just to get it started. And yeah, let's just chop it up. So I'm gonna make space for Nabucco to speak, and then I'll come back in as well. But yeah, paper boys rock. Although that whole the gig economy and it's just like changing. Even like kids can't even be paper boys anymore. It's messed up. Anyway.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in. Thank you so much for sharing this work with us. I was really struck by the title, actually, We Are Not Dirt, and that really caught my attention. And as I started to read, yes, I went on to the newspaper delivery part, and my brother delivered papers, and I used to help him deliver papers, but that seemed like an eternity ago because now we don't get deliveries like that. It's delivered by adults. So the world has changed. And, you know, what drew me to this was how the teacher took a real sort of activist approach and really took that sort of approach head on of what was happening and to touch the emotions of the students. Because I think teaching is really an emotional experience, and learning is an emotional experience, and often we don't really acknowledge that so much because we've sort of dehumanized the educational experience. So I'm hoping to hear more from the authors about your perspective and listening to your students' voice along those lines.
Yeah, I did want to, maybe if we could jump into like getting specific around the discipline, the discipline procedure that was up at the school. I know you're looking at the disciplinary rules and policies, and it seemed like it's a standard like progressive disciplinary system that was in place, which, you know, a lot of schools have them, but is it really like the naming itself that was the tension? Like, because again, just calling it like the sweep, which again has, you know, the connotations, you know, drug sweep, all sweeps, just that whole terminology, I get it. But is the progressive discipline also problematic? Which I wasn't sure in my read if that itself was problematic. So I love to hear you guys speak on that.
Yeah, no, just to clarify, the students didn't have a problem with the accountability sort of progressive discipline of the policy, they really zeroed in on the name itself, and that was really important to them. And yeah, and it was, yeah. So it wasn't that they were wanting to throw out the policy and not be accountable. They're fine with it. In fact, I did want to mention that after the school renamed the policy, they gave it a name which the students thought was better than tardy sweep. They named it the Start on Time policy, and the students were happy, very happy with that more respectful name, and they're fine with the accountability, part. It was the name that they were wanting to change.
So why did it take so long? Like, again, adults, we always we screw up so many times, man. Like, why did it take so long? Come on.
That's a great question. It's all I could tell you is that we were invited to, several meetings that took a long time.
But to your kids and your mom, was it a no-brainer kind of thing after they put together the proposal?
I think it was. In fact, the students were like, what's going on? Now we're invited to another meeting and another meeting. And the only thing I could say, just sort of hypothetically, is maybe this, and forgive me if this doesn't sound humble or anything, but maybe this approach, having students approach the table of power with such a creative, approach was maybe so far ahead of its time, or outside the categories of their understanding of how policy is changed, or at least naming of policy, that maybe they didn't really know what to do with it. Or to give them credit, actually, I would just say that maybe they were really thinking of what name to replace it with, and everybody's busy. They couldn't find a satisfying name until they finally did, perhaps. So it could be a mix of all those things. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not trying to dominate the conversation, but like I say, it really resonated with me. So if I'm over talking, like, Nabucco, tell me to be quiet, okay? But I did want to jump in and talk about like how you cultivated developing empathy with your students, and as well as talk about how you framed attacking this problem. Did you like use this approach around, because it's some work we've been doing at my high school, at the U school, where we have students identify using like a design thinking approach, like wicked problems, and then through the wicked problems, they go through a similar like participatory research approach which you were developing. But I'm specifically interested in like your approach to empathy, and then I'll take a pause. I do have some other questions about like how you connected with the literature piece as well, but yeah, I don't want to overwhelm the conversation.
Sure. Well, the empathy piece, I think, came very naturally and easily, because when they mentioned the name of the policy, it struck a chord with me, because I had in my own private thoughts in months and years past also wondered about that name and how it didn't really seem very respectful or empowering of the students. So when they mentioned it, it was a pretty, it was a match, I guess you could say, that I kind of aligned with that as well in terms of the empathy part. And then I read one of Bell Hooks's books, education, something about teaching to transgress. And that was a very beautiful book in terms of just the importance of allowing students to speak rather than, the teacher speaking all the time, but really, really, and then blending it with Paulo Freire's 5 steps of critical praxis as specifically as Duncan, Andrade, and Morel write about it in their book. That it just seemed like a perfect project for those teaching modalities and structures, especially the 5 steps, because it's so clear. But it was definitely a teaching process and discussion process, and and not every student participated. This was definitely a participatory project in the sense that students could opt in to be part of this project, or do their own business letter on something else and get credit for the business letter aspect. But as this kind of took flight, there was a number of students in each of the 5 periods that I teach that wanted to be part of it, and so I had to allow for that flexibility to happen, and I'm grateful for the students that felt this was important to them. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I'm curious. Nabucco, you have any thoughts around particularly as a designing education and opportunities around using a design thinking process, and maybe you can give us some contributions that we can think about for future projects.
Okay, so I've been involved in various my areas in designing instruction and in doing things with technologies. Here I'm really struck by the approach that you use. So I'm looking to find out how you sort of spent that time in the ideation of this, coming up with this book, and the set of letters, because I'm wondering, it's easy to look back and say, well, that's really disrespectful, the tardy sweep. How did the students sort of frame that problem, and how did you use those techniques? Because you mentioned the inside-outside circle techniques. Can you tell us more about the steps that you took to get them to come up with this?
Sure. So the inside-outside circle technique was just basically, we formed 2 circles, an inside circle and an outside circle, and students would speak to each other. And I raised questions like, at first it was because the inside-outside circle happened at the beginning of the year. It was a getting to know you. So at first, they would share their name and their favorite color and their hobbies. And then we moved the question to share with your partner problems you see on campus. And then they shared different things, like I mentioned, the school lunches or other issues, as well as, and then the tardy sweep name came up. And then, so after we stopped that process, we shared out loud as a larger group and wrote their responses on the board. And then this particular issue that the students had mentioned, I basically said to the students, if you could change one of the problems that we see on the board, which one, if we could together, working together as students and teacher, all of us, if we could actually make a change to one of these problems to make our campus a better place, which one would it be? So from the beginning, it was democratic. The students voted on it. It was this issue took the majority, and that's how it got started. So that was the first step, was to identify the problem in terms of Paulo Freire's 5 steps of critical praxis. Step 1 is identify the problem. Then once we identified it, then we began to research the problem, and they went online, and that's when they began to discover the connotations of the word sweep and really began to see how much of a problem that name was. And after identifying the problem and researching the problem, they started sharing stories about the name and how it affected them, etc. Then we moved to step 3, which was to develop a collective plan of action to make the problem go away. to solve the problem. And we brainstormed that together in a democratic process of voting, and finally a book of letters to the administrators was what the students wanted ultimately. And then we got started on actually step 4, implementing the collective plan of action. So their collective plan of action was to collect these letters in a book. And then later they thought, well, why don't we ask professors at Fresno State and maybe a local poet if they would like to participate. And in chapter 2 of the book, after our letters, there could be letters of support from community members to leverage the issue or the support for changing the name. And then step 4 is to implement the collective plan of action. So after creating it and publishing the book, it was what came natural was to celebrate in a book release party and see what the principal had to say about it. Maybe he could change the name. We thought that the activism stopped there. We celebrated the book release. We got the message to the principal, and we thought that we were going to have an answer. But then he thought that he didn't want to take the power away from the committee that named it. But he did tell us, he goes, I won't be able to change the name because there was a committee on campus that named it, but I would like to invite you all to one of their meetings, and I support you in your effort because I agree with it. And so that's kind of how it evolved. And then we went to several meetings, which lasted about a year. So the students did this project in their sophomore year. They attended meetings throughout their junior year. And finally, the school rolled out the new name. It went from tardy sweep, and they changed it to start on time policy. And as the students walked onto campus their senior year, they were able to enjoy the fruits of their activism. And generations after them are also able to enjoy a respectful name to a policy that at one time in the history of our school was dehumanizing in its language. Thank you.
Yeah, Everardo, if you don't mind me jumping in, something that I just was noting as I read through the piece, was reviewing my notes this afternoon, and I'm reflecting on the fact that we've read not only in the current 2018-19 marginal syllabus a number of articles about youth literacies, civic engagement, different ways in which youth are exercising, as was mentioned in this conversation, different types of multimodal, community-oriented, place-based literacies to enact community change. But one of the things that really comes through in hearing you speak about the work now and reading about it is really kind of how complex and hard the work is. It's not like an easy story. And you mentioning the opt-in, opt-out policy, and as I'm actually looking at the article, there's something here. I'm going to mention the page number on page 80 where you talk about some of the students being quite reticent and having their doubts, and then again opting out. And it's nice to now learn in this conversation that in choosing to opt out, they had a different assignment that they could complete, and you were honest and also providing space in the article and voice to the students who did have doubts, and then the kind of administrivia of taking well over a year, the arc of this project starting towards the end of these students' sophomore year, and then it's only until they're seniors when they see again the fruits of this important activism. And it just reminds me that this is really tough work, and it's not probably always rosy. And I'd be curious to hear from either of our partner authors or perhaps anyone here who's doing this kind of work with students. Certainly read, and Joe as well. I know Joe's work here in Denver also speaks to this, about how to encourage and how to maintain and engage students when the work is so hard and when there are all kinds of barriers and all kinds of doubts and all kinds of perhaps reasons to step away from this kind of activism. And yet how do we persist and how do we sustain this kind of activism? Just wanted to throw that out there.
And I want to jump in just for a moment, Remi, because I want to kind of piggyback on your question, because what strikes me is that I'm also appreciative of the idea that Everardo every student didn't have to participate in this activism, and every student didn't have to go to those meetings. What is also true, though, is it sounds like this was pretty central to the class activity. So while every student didn't necessarily have to be situated as an activist, the activism and the empathy was central. And I think that that's a form of rejecting neutrality that we've read about a lot. And I want to have that same courage as a teacher to reject neutrality and allow people to not necessarily jump onto the bulk of the class's cause. But I do want to be elevating the marginalized voices in my classroom, and I'd like to make that central. And so I just wonder how that strikes other people as well. The idea that activism was a key thing happening, and that speaking truth to power wasn't the breakout activity, it was the central activity.
I wanted to jump in a segue to talk about like how he used literature, and I want to give like a case in point where I did something similar with my students. This is when I taught middle school. So we were reading The Giver, and we're looking at the dystopia of adults again, and middle school students, they want to push back about rules and like, okay, what rules seem unfair, or what do you see that's unfair? And one of my girl students, she challenged me directly and said, well, Mr. Reed, I don't like it that you're sexist in the classroom, like you're a sexist teacher. And I was like, whoa. So like really, and so we wrote letters as well. And she wrote a letter describing her indicators of the sexism that I exhibited in class. Not only myself, but even like we had a politician that visited our school, and he made some remarks that she didn't take well to. And so in being challenged, I'm like, hey, I need to do an audit on myself. And so I brought in somebody else. They observed my practice. They documented it. I shared that back with the students. And eventually, like now at that point, when I start like taking an active role and looking at my practice and getting student feedback, and we did the inside outside circle around it. Now at that point, the students like, oh man, you're doing too much now. And I'm like, well, no, this is a serious issue. And eventually I ended up nominating this student we have this award in the National Liberty Museum. I ended up nominating her for being a young hero. And she's like, wow, all of this? And I'm like, yeah, because you challenged me and you made me a better teacher. And but back to it, it started again around looking at the rules that kids, or the changes that kids wanted to change. But again, it was based in the literature that we was reading as well. So I'm curious how you use literature to like, and I noticed in the article there was some literature that you used as well. So I'm curious to hear that.
Yeah, in the literature, we dived into basically the idea of connotations in terms of dirt, and how dirt is perceived by different authors, and then that launched conversations in the classroom where students could express their connotations of dirt that were similar or different than those in the literature. Yeah.
I'm going to just...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nabu.
Yeah, could I just jump in? Could you tell us a bit more about how you sort of created the climate of safety, so the students felt that they could talk openly to you about feeling like dirt, like how, because I'm not sure what your classroom looks like. I'm guessing it's increasingly diverse. Is it, there are different students of different backgrounds? Did everyone feel on board and united in feeling that, tardy sweep is really derogatory and dehumanizing? And how were they, how did you create that setting so that they all felt that they could talk openly about something like this?
I think it was basically the genesis of this project, I think, has a lot to do with their feeling open to discuss this, because from the very beginning, this was something they felt was an issue on campus. And I think as I took it seriously, and they saw that I was taking their, I mentioned to them, it would be lovely if we could address all these problems, but for the sake of the assignment and for the sake of success, and as an experiment, we need to pick one. So as we picked this one, I think the fact that it came from them and I supported them on that made them feel comfortable. As I mentioned earlier, not everybody, this wasn't an issue for everyone, but there was a critical mass in all the classes that felt this was an issue to join together and try to make some change. So I think that helped. And maybe it's my non-judgmental disposition. I'm a type 9 on the Enneagram, and people tend to feel comfortable talking and just being at ease around me. Maybe that also helped. So I kind of have that non-judgmental presence, and I think that helps. And so I hope that answered your question a bit.
I think so. I think and your warmth and your sincerity come through, even though we're connected digitally, because I can't imagine this is an easy topic for students to pursue and over such a long time. So I was glad to hear that you could provide the context for how it actually changed. So they were, and before they graduated, and that they could have a year as seniors with the new name for the program. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And just one thing I wanted to mention that's related to Remi and your Nobuko's comments about this is hard work, this is like the sustainability of it. So what helped me and the students to stay with it and not give up was the clear design of the 5 steps of critical praxis. We just had faith in it. We just felt that if we leaned on it, trusted that if it helped to solve problems in the past, so much so that this 5-step process is promoted as a helping agent for activists, then if we just stayed with it, that hopefully, we would win. And that's what happened. It was definitely a learning process and patience, but it's also a testament to the power of Freire's 5 steps of critical praxis, where while our humanity was wearing thin, our patience was thin, we leaned on the trellis of the 5 steps of critical praxis, which helped us through. And I'm grateful for that.
This is Joseph Rodriguez, and I'd like to invite Everardo to, just from my notes, if you could tell us a little bit about the demographics of the school then, possibly now, and also how we opened with Mr. Reed asking, and also Nobuko, about that role, that periodical that people look forward to in the morning, the newspaper delivery. So again, tell us a little about the demographics and also your role with language, with words. Early on, early morning, you were doing language arts labors early on.
That's a nice connection. Could you repeat the question just to make sure I answer it directly?
Yes, tell us about the demographics of the school then, right? This was a 3 to 4 year project, and also about your newspaper boy life.
Sure. Okay, so the demographics, it's mostly Latino, and then the next group is Southeast Asian, and a smaller size group of Punjabi community, African American, very small Caucasian community. So it's mostly made up of that demographic, and I would say working class community, and even poverty, and we even have a good sized number of homeless population on our campus. So it's a campus that's rough and tumble. It's got its challenges, which is reflective of our community. And that being said, by extension, a lot of our students are affected by the prison industrial complex, in the sense that they may have family members, or they have extended family members or friends that are caught up in this prison industrial complex. And just to kind of bring it back to this article, the word sweep was kind of had resonance to that system that they are affected by. And this was a way to, in a sense, fight back and create something, create a road towards humanizing our community that is often criminalized. And my experience with being a news carrier, sharing language in that sense was, it was a survival, job to pay for clothes, pay for things that I wanted as a teenager, and yeah, it was I don't know what else to say about that, other than the fact that when I got up one morning, I remember seeing the Rodney King, article in 1991, 1992. It just really struck me, in the sense that the police could be so brutal to a person that's unarmed, and there was sort of a connection here many years later in the classroom as a language teacher, teaching in my neighborhood where I grew up. So this had a lot of soulful resonance in undertaking this project. It was very moving for me as a teacher as well, to participate in this project of joining with the students and helping to guide them through to making change in their community.
Hey guys, I wanted to jump in there and ask you guys about like your writing process, particularly around co-writing this piece, because I've done some co-writing before, and it's all different kind of models in the way in which you can co-write. So I'm really particularly interested, like Joseph, how you saw the co-writing of this wonderful article take place, particularly that you captured like Everardo's like voice so well in it as well. So I'm curious.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I'll certainly be open, Everardo, as well, to describe it. I think it initially began over, reconnecting in person with a fellow reader, writer, teacher. And I remember asking him about a project that he was really excited about before I jumped into visiting schools in the region, or before I would be assigned some. And he had already done work with colleagues in our building in the Kremen School of Education and Human Development. So I asked him to tell me more about the project, and I was immediately drawn to the title. My initial work began interviewing him informally. I was taking notes in my head when there was interruption by a server. I was using my notes app, or immediately after he and I would visit, I would take notes in the car. So I was a informal ethnographer, never using that word, never using pen or paper too much in front of him. And then I remember he came to my office and we co-wrote. We edited, we revised, and it involved, surrendering the keyboard on my part, and also clarifying some of the phrases that he was using. But I'd have to say that in my role as interpreter, translator of the work he had done, both oral and written, as interpreter, translator, I really found that, this book is by Donald Graves. His big message is children want to write. And for Everardo students, I learned that adolescents or teenagers want to write, to be heard, listened to, and for a result, an outcome to appear visibly from their action. And I think in this case, the message is teachers want to write. And I felt that I was in a privileged position, having submitted to English Journal with Toby Amert a proposal that we co-edit from 2018 to 2023 English Journal, and really push for more teacher voices in the field, out of the field, writing. And when the article was accepted, I had gotten the news by then, I think a few weeks later, that I would been selected, because I had already interviewed. So it had gone through a peer review process, the article that we co-wrote, before I knew my role. And now we've invited even more voices, and wherever I am, I want those teachers to be heard, and even mentoring them, because the teachers have these voices, and unfortunately, we're not interviewing or doing enough ethnography with them that they take the lead in the voice, because it's theirs.
That was powerful.
Yeah, that was really helpful to understand how this project came together and ended up being the article we get to annotate moving ahead in May. So we're nearing our hour here. So I'd really like to ask everyone, first of all, I'd like to reiterate my thanks to everyone for joining us. And I wonder if we could just whip around with everyone's takeaway from this conversation, or maybe a thing you're looking forward to writing in the margins as this article goes online for folks to have conversations there.
Well, I just want to express my gratitude for the opportunity to engage in discussion of this article. Oftentimes my experience is, articles like these, get written, they get published, they get put away, and I feel affirmed, I feel acknowledged, I feel appreciated just by the simple fact of coming together with all of you, professional people and human beings to just carve out some time from our busy lives to pause and have a humanizing discussion about something that you wonder if people if they will read, or how it impacted them. And so I just want to express my gratitude to everyone at the Marginal Syllabus for providing this opportunity to to just engage. I'm mindful of each of your time and energy, and I'm heartened that something like the Marginal Syllabus exists. I'm grateful for it, and I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who is participating in this, on this call.
One of the questions was about YPAR, and I think a lot has been written about youth participatory action research, even examples. And when I heard Everardo's story and how he described his students, their work, I immediately thought of those 4 letters, that it was in action. He was not using the term, which I think was helpful. I'm pro-theory, I'm pro-practice, but I like the stories from the classroom, and they carried us forward, what the students wrote, the invitation that this be housed at our Fresno State library, and also within the school library. And in recent years, I've learned a lot from Morel, Mira, and also Antero Garcia about how they do YPAR, and even how they've added they now describe it as youth-led participatory action research. And I'm really driven to that hyphen of youth-led, because they are our researchers, and they do it so well through social media, in their classrooms, across texts, and with teachers like Everardo who are present and really sit beside them, the original use of that Latin verb from assessment. And I hope that more teachers and professors consider this dialogue, and to invite teachers who want to write with them, beside them. Thank you.
So I'm going to just jump in. Thank you so much for sharing this work. Such a powerful piece. And I find these kind of conversations sort of give the feedback to the author, and also hopefully to the students that participated, because we so appreciate what you've done here. And really, this article touched me because it was so authentic, and to hear you in person describe how the process came to be, and also to find out that after this publication came out, that something really did change for the students. So thank you so much for that. And I really hope to find out more about more initiatives at how we can sustain this kind of activism and following the framework. So I look forward to hearing more about that sometime.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, my takeaways is basically that I'm super appreciative of just spending the time talking about the practice of teachers and students, and acknowledging that it is hard work, it is messy work, and I'm not saying it's dirty work, but it is messy, right? And I appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that you had a teacher and a researcher collaborating together to co-write this article. And I'm excited to be in this marginal conversation, because I've recently co-wrote a piece with a teacher, a researcher, and so maybe one day a piece that I have will be on the Marginal Syllabus as well. So yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
And Reed, that would be awesome. And given how much you participated in this project over the last, many months, that'd be great. I just want to, of course, say thank you, first and foremost, certainly to Reed and Nabucco for joining us as readers. You have before, and we always welcome your participation. But certainly, and most importantly, to both Everardo and to Joseph for being our partner authors. I am now drowning in notes, and I wanted to just, as my kind of final comment, just read back things that both of you said that have really resonated with me. Joseph, I'll start with something that you just mentioned a few moments ago, that teachers want to write. And, I think that for the team that has brought the Marginal Syllabus programming to the fore over the past few years now, we believe that teachers do want to write, and they want to write about their practice and their learnings and their questions and their uncertainties and maybe things that are awkward or things that are confusing, particularly as they relate to the practices of equity-oriented work in their classrooms. And so hopefully teachers who do want to write also turn to open and collaborative annotation as one form of writing that can continue this conversation to live beyond this webinar. And then Everardo, a few moments ago when you were talking about the 5 steps of critical praxis, you said, we had faith in it. And you said you were leaning on the process even when the times are challenging. And that just struck me as so beautiful. And I'm still kind of resonating with that moment of really having faith in the process, in that youth-led work, and in being critically oriented to the work of dignity and the work of presence and respect that guided what you and your students were doing. And so just thank you both for that. And I just really sincerely appreciate the opportunity that we have to collectively read and discuss and write about the work. Thank you again.
So that leaves me, I think, with the last takeaway, which I guess I would like to echo Nobuko's, question about how do we sustain this activism? I'm just really hopeful that this project helps us answer the questions. Hopefully this project is a small part of that. How is a small part of the answer to that question. And then, it's so fabulous to be able to share this platform with you all. And I'm left with the piece, which I think is an amazing, piece of evidence that students do have powerful voices. Powerful teacher practice does need to be surfaced. And here, the student voice and the teacher practice really should serve as reminders to schools as we generate policies and name those policies and then execute those policies, to really be mindful of those critical stakeholders. So I'm really glad that we have this piece going forward, and I'm every bit as grateful for this piece as I am for this conversation, so we can't thank you enough. So now I'd get to just wrap this conversation up by saying that We Are Not Dirt, Freirean Counternarratives and Rhetorical Literacies for Student Voice in Schooling by Everardo Pedraza and Joseph Rodriguez will be available for annotation through the month of May at educatorinnovator.org. And then you can join us for, as Remi indicated, in the ensuing months for still more opportunities to annotate. So for updates, subscribe to our blog and sign up for a monthly newsletter at educatorinnovator.org. Follow us at innovates_ed, and please use the hashtag Marginal Syllabus. Thanks, everyone.